Difficult to get a mortgage these days. I know a lot of people do. And whenever people call me to get a mortgage and they are an Uber driver, it's usually the same story. Hey, I'm calling because I talked to my bank and I can't get a mortgage approval right now. Looking to see if I can get an approval with a broker. And these conversations are very disheartening because these folks usually have great seniority at their bank. They've been there for a number of years, and the bank can also see, they're getting deposits from Uber or Lyft or Skip the Dishes. And the bank's not really doing anything to get them the financing. The bank just simply comes back and says, we can't do it. And maybe this Uber driver's been in the business for 1 year, 1.5 years, maybe approaching their 2-year point, and they have a good history of work with Uber. And with that, you would think that the bank would say, yes, let's do the mortgage. I see that you're working hard as an Uber driver. I see that you're working every day of the week, and something like that is hard for someone because they're really working hard at it. And I know a lot of clients, they're doing this part-time on the side during the evenings or the weekends, but they're doing it consistently. So these clients, they call me, and it's really awful. The banks don't do anything for these clients. The banks will say, no, we can't do this mortgage. It's not a full-time income. The banks don't see the fact that the income itself is regular. All they see is, hey, the deposits are inconsistent, or you've been there for less than 2 years, or we can't use this income because it's not employment, it's a contract, or you're self-employed. Well, today I'm talking about how easy it actually is to get a mortgage as an Uber driver, and specifically what you need to do and who you need to talk to get the financing you need as an Uber driver. And this does not only apply to Uber drivers. It also applies to Lyft drivers, Skip the Dishes drivers, perhaps you're a DoorDash driver. There's a lot of different rideshare and delivery employment opportunities out there that people are doing to supplement their income or even use as their full-time income right now. And I've seen that these drivers sometimes make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, and the bank won't use any of that income. It's really disheartening. So stay tuned. I'll get into some of the specifics on what you will need to do to get an approval as a Uber delivery driver. And if you're just joining me now, thanks for joining me. My name is Joe Blodek. I'm a mortgage broker. I've been financing real estate for 14 years in Ontario. If you ever need any mortgage advice, you can feel free to call me. I'm never too busy to take on a new client and help you with your mortgage process. Even if you're looking to just get set up and get an idea of what you're looking to do in 1 or 2 or 3 years, it's never too soon to get started in the process. Perhaps you're thinking right now, I want to buy, but it's going to be probably a year or 2 from now before I do anything. You know what? That's actually the perfect time to connect with a broker, such as myself, to get things started, see where you're at, and see where you need to be 1 or 2 years from now. Quite often what I do is I tell clients, you know what, this is where you're at now. You may not be able to afford what you want right now, but if you do these little tweaks in your lifestyle, you will get to where you want to be. And a lot of these times clients come back to me and say, Joe, your plan worked. I'm able to get a mortgage now, and I was able to buy a home, the home I wanted, and we're all set. So let's dive in to some of these specifics for anyone getting a mortgage as an Uber driver, because it's really not that hard, okay? So I'm going to run through a scenario that I recently came across here on Canadian Mortgage Weekly, Canada's weekly mortgage news podcast. And feel free to let me know in the comments what you think. Is this your scenario? Are you in a similar situation? So this is an actual story about a client that was an Uber driver, still is an Uber driver, who was able to buy their home and get a mortgage in Canada, in Ontario, through one of the lenders that I deal with on a daily basis as a mortgage broker. And it's a great lender. Nothing wrong with the lender. It's just a bank that is not one of the top big six banks that you see on the corner of this downtown streets that you of the town you live in. So, getting into this example, I have some notes here I'm going to read off of. I'm not going to use real names, but let's call him Phil. Phil is an Uber driver. He's looking to get into home ownership. And he was having a tough time because Phil couldn't get approved through his bank. Even though he was banking at that bank, one of the big six banks, even though he was banking at that bank for a number of years, he was not able to get approved. And this Uber driver, his name is Phil, he had previously worked in another industry for about 10 years. So he actually was in a different industry altogether and came to be an Uber driver because that was better for him. The lifestyle was better for him. It's just a way better job for him to be an Uber driver. So he did take a break after working in this other industry for 10 years. So he had an employment gap. So there's that issue too that his bank had an issue with. They were wondering, why didn't you work there? So he decided to go and become an Uber driver and started working as an Uber driver, which ended up turning into a full-time thing for him. He started working every day, waking up in the morning, driving Uber, delivering things, ride sharing, all that stuff. And him and his wife were looking to get a place. They wanted to buy a home. Okay? So they were looking in the southwestern Ontario area. So even though myself, I'm Joe Bladdock, I'm based in the Simcoe County, Barrie, and Orillia area here in Ontario. I can help clients all over Ontario. And these clients were in southwestern Ontario. So they wanted to find a home that was about $700,000. So great for them. That's a great home. It's actually above the average price home in Canada right now. And for $700,000, you can easily find a detached home in Canada right now. So great price range that they were aiming to get into. Lots of options. But mortgage-wise, their bank did not want anything to do with them. And this, again, is a fantastic bank. They are very well known in Canada. And these clients had a history with this bank, but the bank wanted nothing to do with the mortgage. And I see this all the time. Clients call me and they say, Joe, I can't get a mortgage with my bank, but I end up getting them the mortgage. And it's crazy because these clients, they have good credit, they have income coming in, but they can't get a mortgage. It's insane. Like, as if home ownership issues are already hard in Canada, right? It's hard enough to get a home. It's hard enough to keep a home in Canada with these rising interest rates. Anyway, so he worked in the prior industry there. He had a credit score. Let's call him Phil. He had a credit score of 667. Okay. And it's not a great credit score, but it's a decent credit score. Okay. A great credit score, just if you want to know, is 720 to 740 and above. I've seen credit scores higher than this, and credit score, the perfection of credit, the highest credit score you can get is actually 900. Can't go any higher than 900. I've only seen that a few times. But this guy, Phil, not 900, not 800, not 700. His credit score was 667. Okay. So working as an Uber driver, he made $70,000. And still, the bank wanted nothing to do with this guy, even though he was with that bank for a number of years, lots of seniority. His bank could not get him a mortgage. It's against their policy. It doesn't fit in the box. I mean, I hear that all the time. So many times clients will call me and say, Joe, I can't get a mortgage with my bank. It's really disheartening to hear that because you think loyalty would mean something. You think that being with a bank, for them to see what's going on in your finances, for them to see that you're making this income, you think that this bank would be able to give you a mortgage. But it just did not happen. So he's making $70,000. And then what happens? He has some late payments too, okay? Just a couple late payments. This was during that time he was out of work between being an Uber driver and his previous industry of 10 years. But he cleared it all up, right? His credit score dropped a little bit, came down to 638. So it's still above 600, but it's not the perfect 900. It's not the 800. It's not the 700 that you see, okay? So this client, an Uber driver, money's coming in. He's making $70,000 a year. But the bank that he's dealing with, the bank that he has his banking with, the bank that he has seniority with, been loyal to, wants nothing to do with this guy. All right. So he tried to get a mortgage, but they were declined. Okay. Him and his wife were declined. So here is what happened. So we took a look at his 12 months bank statements, right? Because as an Uber driver, you're not going to get an employment letter. You're not going to get a pay stub showing Government of Canada income tax, CPP deductions, provincial income tax. You're not going to get a pay stub with that. You're not going to get a T4 from Uber, right? They don't do that sort of thing. It's completely self-employed. And you're not going to get, with Uber, you're not going to get any sort of confirmation over the phone that the bank can call and say, hey, does Phil work for Uber? And how much does he make per year? They're not going to do that. It's not the typical type of employment that the banks, the big six banks deal with. They're not going to say, we want to do this mortgage. This guy had super seniority with his bank. He had been there for a number of years, and I couldn't believe it. Calls me and says I can't get a mortgage. So provided his 12 months bank statements. I reviewed them. We saw that, he is making a lot of money through Uber. And you know what? He does have some expenses. So we look at these expenses, right? And as an Uber driver, you think, what expenses do I have, right? And do they deduct from the income? Well, reasonably, yes. So let's take a look at these expenses. I took a look at the 12 months bank statements, and I saw, okay, so we have a cell phone that you need for your work, right? You have your app. This is part of your job, right? It's a recurring expense, okay? So this needs to be subtracted from your total gross income from Uber. So I put that all together, all his cell phone bill payments, and I put that in the underwriting profile that he made X amount gross amount and X amount cell phone bill payments. Okay. Now there's another expense as an Uber driver that you would have, and this is insurance, right? You're driving your car, you have to pay insurance. Perhaps you're paying $2,000 a year, or $3,000 a year, whatever, or a couple $100 a month. So I looked over his insurance payments. We removed that from the gross income from the Uber income that he was making, because obviously that's a cost of doing business. And really, at the end of the day, let's show the bank some reasonable amounts of underwriting here. We can't use the gross income because you don't make $70,000 from Uber without having any expenses. We need to put something reasonable together for the bank. And keep in mind, if you're just joining me, this is an Uber driver. He made $70,000. He cleared $70,000, and the bank would not give him any type of mortgage pre-approval. Nada. his bank, he was there for a number of years, and he just did not have any luck. They were declined. They couldn't get a house, and they were hoping to get a $700,000 home. All right, so let's look at this. So we have insurance, we have cell phone, two big expenses as an Uber driver. Okay, what else do we have? We have fuel. Okay, fuel for that vehicle. You're going to have to pay for your own fuel as an Uber driver, and that is also deducted from your essentially your gross income from Uber, right? We need to do this manually because as a contractor with Uber, Uber's not going to get on the phone with the bank and say, yes, Phil makes such and such money with Uber per week. They're not doing that. They're not issuing a T4. They're not issuing a pay stub. There's none of that. And because of that, it doesn't fit in the box that the banks want you to fit in. So instead, Phil came to a broker like me, Joe Bladdock, been in business for 14 years. We took a look at his situation manually, manual underwriting. This is what it's called, manual underwriting, for those of you who don't know. All right. Then there were some miscellaneous expenses as well as internet. So all these expenses, fuel, insurance, cell phone, internet, and miscellaneous expenses, they totaled a certain amount. So we removed that from the gross income from Uber, and we were left with $70,000. So his bank that he was at for years and years and years saw these expenses out of his bank account. They saw his income from Uber. However, they did not give him any mortgage approval. It was insane. Why don't these banks give clients mortgage approvals? It's so easy. I mean, he came to me. It was so easy to do this. Oh my goodness. So if you're an Uber driver and you're having a tough time getting a mortgage, just stay tuned. I'm going to go over the last little bit here. So we put these numbers into our system, obviously, all manual, right? To determine his net income. Net income $70,000 after the fuel and insurance and internet and cell phone and miscellaneous expenses. You know, maybe he buys meals on the road, so we can deduct that. And then we put all this into a profile. We send it off to the bank for an approval because he found a property in this $700,000 price range. And we wait, we wait to see if we get that approval. And you know what? The bank's going to ask us for some more documentation. That's okay. So let me just go over some of that extra documentation you'll need as an Uber driver to be able to get this kind of mortgage, okay? It's not T4 slips. It's not pay stubs, okay? It's not an employment confirmation or an employment letter. Uber will do nothing of that. Skip the dishes. Forget about it. DoorDash, like they could care at all, So we look at your profile, your Uber profile. We need a copy of that. We need 12 months banking statements to see exactly what your income is from Uber, what's coming in, and what's going out. The banking statements will tell us, your gasoline, your insurance, your fuel, all that stuff. Even though his bank saw that, this is the bank he banks at, and he didn't even get a mortgage through there. It's insane, crazy. All right. Then we get the client to sign it's called a signed and completed declaration of income form, highlighting all the business expenses and that, this is his business, that sort of thing. It's his Uber business, right? It's not anyone else's. And that ties him through that income, right? Sometimes they'll ask for some additional supporting documents too. But this is the meat, right? This is what we're looking at. And we're able to fund this mortgage with these documents. So there's no T4 slips. There's no letters of employment. There is no pay stubs. Forget about that. Uber, skip the dishes. They don't do any of the income tax deductions or CPP deductions or Ontario income tax deductions. If you're an Uber driver in Ontario, You need to give me a call. Let's see where you're at today. Let's make sure you have these documents ready to go. So when you get a mortgage, you're ready to go. This guy was able to get that mortgage. He was able to buy that $700,000 home, even though he was at this job, the Uber position, for less than 2 years. He'd been at this job for 12 months, right? Doing Uber for 12 months. And the bank, what they do is they look at the collective deposits for those 12 months. They look at the collective deposits. So if you're looking at, you didn't make very much on your first month, you didn't make very much on your second month either because you're just getting used to it. But your third month, hey, you really cleared some bank. And then the fourth month, even better, right? It's a higher amount of income. They're going to look at those fluctuations and they're going to add it all up together because, typical banks, they'll see, okay, first month, nothing. Second month, nothing. So how do we know that this is continuous? Well, there are banks out there that will look at this and say, you know what? This is a cumulative amount. It's no problem to get this mortgage. We're going to look at your 12 months bank statements, look at what you earn in the 12 months, use that, deduct your cell phone payment, deduct your fuel, deduct your insurance, that sort of thing, get you to sign a form saying that this is your business, provide some additional documentation, like typical documentation, like when we're talking photo ID and things like that, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. No letters of employment, T4s, pay stubs with deductions from the income tax, nothing like that, right? And they were able to get that mortgage, right? And I see this all the time. He was super happy, and I do clients like this all the time. I do files like this for Uber. I do files like this for anyone else that's self-employed. If you're self-employed right now and you've been in business for less than 2 years, say you've been in business for a year and a half or only 12 months, you can get a pre-approval and buy a house too. There are other banks available outside of the big 6 banks, right? There's lots of products available. And as a mortgage broker, it's really awful to hear. I'll be at a get together or a party. And I'll be listening to someone say, hey, I looked at a house and I went to my bank and I couldn't get approved because they said I wasn't in business for 2 years yet. I didn't have my tax returns. And that's it. They stop right there. They didn't do anything after that. They didn't call anyone else. They were just, you know what? It's not the right time for me to buy a home. However, there are other lenders out there that will give you that mortgage. And I can't believe we're not taught this in school. I can't believe that people think that the only mortgages out there are the ones from the big 6 banks or the big 5 banks, whatever you call it, right? Only, like, there are other lenders, banks out there that give great mortgages, great interest rates, but they don't have checking and savings accounts, right? Like, just because you are banking with that same bank that provides you with your checking and savings account for your employment or pay deposits doesn't mean that you should get the mortgage there. There are many other options, and quite often the banks that are the big 6 banks, they're not really interested too much in the mortgage. They're more interested in making money off you, the checking, the savings, the MasterCards, the Visas, right? Mortgages are typically known as those products that don't make them the same amount of money as checking and savings and Visas and MasterCards do, right? So for them to approve you on the mortgage, it just doesn't make sense. But other banks, they're out there. You need to call me if you are looking for a home and take a look at these other options, because even though you bank with Big Green or Big Red or whoever you bank with, and you can't get a mortgage through them, typically you can get a mortgage somewhere else, right? And as a mortgage customer in Canada, I'm really surprised we're not taught this in school. I'm really surprised that this is not information that everyone knows. All the time, people call me, they say, hey, I can't get a mortgage through my bank. Someone said I should call a broker. They recommended your name. Can you help me? And we put together an approval for them, and they are able to get into that home. or they're able to refinance their home, keep their house, right? I'm gonna just summarize this for you. If anyone's just joining me today, we're looking at how easy it is to get a mortgage as an Uber driver, because there are a lot of banks out there that don't give mortgage approvals for Uber drivers. As a matter of fact, if you have a home and you want to refinance or renew your mortgage, there's a lot of companies that won't renew your mortgage if you show them that you work for Uber. But there are banks out there that do. They can compete with your bank. You can get a mortgage through them and consolidate whatever you need or buy a house. And, just to summarize here, this was Phil, not using real names. Phil came to me. He was banking with his bank for a number of years. He came to me. He was working for Uber for a year. He couldn't get a mortgage through his bank, even though he had great seniority. He came to me for a mortgage and he couldn't get a mortgage. So we looked at his profile. I mean, I'm never too busy to take on your business. If you need this type of advice, feel free to text me. Joe, I'm looking at a mortgage and I'm an Uber driver or I'm self-employed for less than 2 years. Can you help me? And we can do that over text or phone or email, whatever it is. So this guy, Phil, came to me. He didn't have a mortgage through his bank. We looked at his 12 months bank statements manually. We looked at some of his expenses, things like insurance and fuel and cell phone. And we put together a manual underwriting profile and we got him approved for his house, right? Fantastic results here, guys. We're able to get him a mortgage and he was super happy. I mean, as an Uber driver, why do banks discriminate against these folks? I mean, they will not give you a mortgage if you're an Uber driver. But people are not taught that, there are way more mortgage companies than the big 6 banks. There are way more banks out there than people realize. Banks that are Schedule 1 registered, federally regulated banks that can do these types of mortgages, in addition to these big 6 banks. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. I never do. And typically, you can end up way ahead of everyone else. And don't be that guy at the party saying, hey, I tried to get a mortgage through my bank, tried to buy a house, but I couldn't. Boo, poor me. No, call a broker. Call a broker like myself, Joe Bladdock. I've been in business now for 14 years, or text a broker. So have a conversation. A lot of the times people will call me just to have a conversation. Joe, I'm looking at doing this in 4 or 5 years. Where do I need to be in 4 to 5 years to buy this house? I do this for a living. Whereabouts am I? We can do all that without a credit check, even if that's your preference, and take a look at things and take a look at your profile and give you some good advice as to where you need to be. All right. So just a little bit more here, and I gotta go. So I'm gonna have to take off in a few minutes here. I got a lot of stuff on my plate. But where are we? Interest rate wise, interest rates, Bank of Canada hasn't been raising rates now since last year. Next Bank of Canada announcement is in March, on March the 6th. I am anticipating that the Bank of Canada is going to keep rates where they are at, so no movement on rates. As a matter of fact, I think rates may come down towards the end of this year, 2024. So what does that mean about the housing market? Right now, the housing market has been sort of staying where it's at, plus minus 1 or 2% every month on the average national house price in Canada. Not much movement. A lot of my clients that have been waiting, they sold a number of years ago and they've been waiting on their pile of cash. They're starting to give me a call and saying, Joe, we think prices have bottomed out. We're looking at getting back into the market before interest rates come down, because we think when interest rates come down that the prices will start to go up again. So that's what a lot of people are doing right now. And if you're an Uber driver that's looking to get a mortgage and you've been in the business for about 12 months, you can do that. You can do that. All you need to do is call a broker like myself, Joe Bladdock, in the business for 14 years. We take a look at your 12 months bank statements. We take a look at your expenses. We put together a manual underwritten mortgage application. We send it off to the lender and we get an approval based on those documents, not T4 slips, not pay stubs with income tax and CPP deductions, none of that, because it doesn't fit the standard box that banks typically work with. And that's the big six banks. The big six banks have such strict lending criteria in Canada that not only do they not do mortgages for Uber drivers, but they also limit the amount people can borrow quite considerably, whereas these other lenders, big nationally federally regulated Schedule I Canadian banks that don't provide checking and savings accounts, can do and can give you a higher approval amount even so. So that's it for me today. My name is Joe Bladdock. I'm a mortgage broker based out of Barrie and Orillia, Ontario, Simcoe County. I've worked with clients all over Ontario and can help you get that mortgage you deserve. If you feel like you haven't been able to get anywhere with your big six bank, big red, big green, whatever it is, you need to call a broker to see what other options are available. And then once you know what other options are available, you can move ahead with whatever option you feel most comfortable with. But empower yourself with the knowledge to see where you're at. And I'm never too busy to take on your file. All right. So thanks for watching, everyone. I'm just going to shut down this live stream now. But if you need to get in touch with me, feel free to text me. You can find me on my social media channels, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, X, or TikTok. And thanks for watching today. Canadian Mortgage Week